The wind sliced like a blade of ice. It found every thin spot in Elara's worn coat, every gap in her resolve, and cut straight to the bone. Each snowflake that landed on her cheek felt like a tiny, frozen tear. Or maybe they were her own. She couldn't tell anymore. The world had blurred into a swirl of white snow and black despair. In her arms, a small bundle shifted. A tiny, perfect life. Luna. Her daughter. Her world. The one pure thing in the wreckage of her existence. The alley was a canyon of brick and frozen dumpsters. But here, behind the warm-smelling vents of a bakery, there was a small pocket of not quite freezing air. It was the best she could offer. A deep, shuddering sob escaped her throat, a sound swallowed by the howling wind. This was not giving up. She repeated the words in her head, a desperate mantra against the screaming guilt. This is not giving up. This is the only love I have left to give. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the safety pin. She carefully attached the small, folded note to the pink blanket. The paper was already growing damp, the ink threatening to run. She had written it in a shelter lobby 2 days ago, using the stub of a pencil she'd found on the floor. Every word had been a stab to her own heart. Please. Her name is Luna. I love her more than my own life. That is why I have to do this. Keep her safe. Keep her warm. She tucked the blanket tighter around the sleeping infant, her warm breath a tiny puff of steam in the frigid air. She kissed the soft, downy hair on Luna's head, inhaling her daughter's scent one last time. Milk and innocence. Everything she was not. With a final, guttural cry of pain, she placed the bundle into a sturdy, empty bread crate she had dragged into the circle of warmth. A pathetic little fortress against the storm. She backed away. One step. Her soul screamed at her to go back, to snatch her baby up and run into the storm, to perish together. Another step. But the fever that had been simmering in her veins for days was now a raging fire. Her head swam. The cough in her chest felt like ground glass. They wouldn't perish together. She would perish, and Luna would be left alone in the cold. This was the only way. The only chance for her perfect, beautiful daughter. She turned, stumbling out of the alley and into the street. The city lights were hazy halos in the falling snow. Christmas decorations, mocking in their cheer, blinked from across the street. A world of warmth and family she could not enter. She didn't know where she was going. Just away. Away from the greatest love and the greatest failure of her life. The world tilted. The halos of light spun into dizzying circles. Her legs gave out. The cold pavement rushed up to meet her, and the world finally, mercifully, went black. Julian Vance hated Christmas Eve. It was a ghost, a memory of a life that was no longer his. He drove through the deserted streets of the financial district, the tires of his sleek, understated sedan hissing on the snow-covered asphalt. His office tower, the Vance Corporation headquarters, was a dark monolith behind him. He was always the last one to leave, especially tonight. The silence in his car was as profound as the silence in his sprawling, empty mansion. It had been 2 years since Amelia's laughter had filled those spaces. Now, they were just rooms. Beautiful, expensive, hollow rooms. Even his son, Leo, moved through them like a little ghost. A quiet, 5-year-old boy who carried a grief too heavy for his small shoulders. Julian saw the sadness in his eyes and felt his own failure as a father. He could give his son anything money could buy, but he couldn't give him back his mother. He couldn't seem to fill the void she had left. He took a different route home, a subconscious avoidance of the main avenues with their festive lights and crowds of last-minute shoppers. He turned down a quieter side street, lined with old brick buildings and small businesses, now shuttered for the holiday. His headlights cut a path through the thick curtain of snow. And then he saw it. A flash of pink against the grimy gray of a bread crate, tucked into an alleyway. His first thought was a stray animal. A box of abandoned kittens, perhaps. He was a man who couldn't stand to see suffering, no matter how small. With a sigh, he slowed the car and pulled over to the curb. He left the engine running, the warmth a welcome promise for his return. The cold hit him the moment he stepped out, his expensive wool coat suddenly feeling inadequate. He walked toward the alley, his polished leather shoes crunching in the fresh snow. As he drew closer, he realized the pink was a blanket. A baby blanket. His heart stopped. No, he whispered to the empty street. It can't be. He knelt beside the crate, his breath catching in his throat. Inside, Nestled in the blanket was a baby, a tiny, living, breathing infant, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the storm and the impossible circumstances of her arrival in the world. For a moment, he could only stare, a wave of disbelief and horror washing over him. Who could do this? What kind of monster would leave a child in the snow? Then his eyes fell on the note pinned to the blanket. His fingers, stiff with cold, carefully unpinned it. He angled it toward the light from the street lamp to read the smudged, desperate script. Please. Her name is Luna. I love her more than my own life. The words hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't the act of a monster. This was the act of a heartbreaking. That is why I have to do this. He understood. In that moment, the anger vanished, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. A sadness that recognized the scent of absolute desperation. He looked at the tiny, perfect face of the sleeping baby, and his own hollow chest ached with a pain that was both new and terribly familiar. He gently scooped the baby, crate and all, into his arms. She was so light, so fragile. He hurried back to his car, his movements sure and decisive. He placed her carefully in the passenger seat, turning the heat up to full blast. Then he took off his own cashmere coat and draped it over her, creating a warm, dark cocoon. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the numbers 911. He would call, of course, report it. But his first instinct was protection. Get her to the hospital. Now. He started to pull away from the curb, his mind racing. As the car moved forward, his headlights swept across the end of the alley. They illuminated a shape. A dark heap crumpled against the snow-dusted sidewalk. A person. Julian slammed on the brakes. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was a woman. She was wearing a coat so thin it was barely a suggestion of warmth. Her dark hair fanned out against the white snow. He knew. With a certainty that chilled him more than the winter air, he knew it was her. Luna's mother. He grabbed his phone again, this time dialing for an ambulance without a second thought, his voice clipped and urgent. I need an ambulance at the corner of Elm and 4th. A woman, collapsed, possible exposure. He ended the call and looked from the woman on the pavement to the baby sleeping in his coat. Two pieces of a tragedy, separated by 100 feet of cold concrete. He couldn't leave her. He simply couldn't. He had found them both. And in the desolate landscape of his own life, he suddenly knew he was meant to. The first thing Elara registered was the smell. Antiseptic. Clean. The smell of a place where things were meant to be fixed. The second was the sound. The quiet, rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere beside her. She forced her heavy eyelids open. The light was soft, the room a pale, sterile white. And 4 was taped to the back of her hand. A hospital. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Luna. Where was Luna? Did anyone find her? Was she safe? Was she cold? She tried to sit up, a strangled cry escaping her lips. The effort sent a wave of dizziness through her, and a coughing fit racked her body, each convulsion a fresh agony in her chest. Easy. You're all right. Just lie back, a man's voice. Calm and deep. He was sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, and as she fell back against the pillows, he stood and moved to her bedside. He was tall, dressed in a simple dark sweater and trousers that nonetheless looked impossibly expensive. His face was kind, etched with lines of concern. Who are you? She rasped, her voice raw. Where is my baby? My name is Julian Vance, he said softly. I'm the one who found you. And I found her, too. She's safe. I promise you. Elara stared at him, trying to process his words through the fog of fever and fear. She's here? In this hospital? He nodded. Yes. She's in the pediatric wing. She's perfectly healthy. Warm. Safe. The doctors are taking wonderful care of her. Relief washed over her so powerfully it felt like a physical collapse. The tears she thought had run dry began to fall again, hot and silent against her temples. She was safe. Her baby was safe. The relief was quickly followed by a new wave of fear. Social services. The police, they've been notified, Julian said, his voice gentle, devoid of judgment. For now, everyone is just focused on making sure you're both okay. You have a nasty case of pneumonia. You need to rest. She looked at this stranger, this man who had stumbled into her nightmare. He wasn't looking at her like she was a monster. He was looking at her like she was a person. Over the next 2 days, he became a quiet, constant presence. He made sure she had everything she needed. He spoke with the doctors, with the social worker. He deflected questions she was too weak to answer. He simply took care of things. When the day came for her to be discharged, the full weight of her reality came crashing down. She had nowhere to go. No money. No one. She would be sent to a shelter, and the long, bureaucratic process of trying to prove she was a fit mother would begin. A process she was sure to fail. She was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, dressed in the same worn clothes she'd arrived in, when Julian walked in. He held a small bag in his hand. "I brought you some things," he said, placing it beside her. Inside were a warm sweater, new jeans, and boots. Simple, practical things. "I can't pay you back for any of this," she whispered, her voice thick with shame. "It's not a loan," he said. He looked at her, his gaze direct and serious. "Elara, where will you go?" She just shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I have a guest cottage on my property," he said, the words measured, careful. "It's separate from the main house. Private. It's warm, and it has a kitchen. There's food. You could stay there. Just for a while. Until you're back on your feet." She stared at him, stunned. "Why? Why would you do that?" He looked away for a moment, toward the window where the winter sun was shining weakly. "Because no one should be alone after going through what you have. Because I read your note. And because my son, he needs more warmth in his life. And I think you have a great deal of it to give. Even if you don't feel it right now." The offer was insane. A lifeline so unexpected it felt like a dream. But the terror of the alternative, the cold, the streets, the faceless system, was all too real. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The drive to his home was silent. The estate was miles out of the city, hidden behind a tall stone wall and a formidable iron gate. The gate swung open silently, and they drove down a long, winding lane flanked by snow-laden pine trees. The house wasn't a house. It was a mansion, a modern marvel of glass and stone and dark wood. It sat overlooking a frozen lake. It was breathtakingly beautiful and unbearably silent. It felt like a museum, a pristine collection of expensive objects where no one actually lived. Elara felt like a smudge on a clean pane of glass, utterly out of place. A woman with a kind face and a starched uniform, the housekeeper, showed her to the cottage. It was cozier than the main house, but still luxurious in a way that made Elara feel dizzy. It was more than she had ever had, more than she felt she deserved. The next day, Julian brought his son to meet her. Leo was a small, serious boy with his father's dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. He stood slightly behind his father's leg, clutching a small toy car, and just watched her. He didn't say hello. "Leo, this is Elara," Julian said gently. "She's going to be staying with us for a little while." Leo just stared. Elara knew not to push. She saw the fragile walls the boy had built around himself. She understood them. She had her own. She simply smiled, a small, tired smile. "Hello." Leo, he didn't respond. He just kept his large, solemn eyes fixed on her, as if trying to solve a puzzle. In the days that followed, Elara kept to herself, recovering her strength, trying to make sense of the impossible turn her life had taken. She saw Leo only occasionally, a small figure playing alone in the snow or watching cartoons in the vast living room of the main house. He never spoke to her. He only watched. One afternoon, she was sitting in the cottage's small living area, staring out the window, her thoughts a tangled mess of Luna and court dates and her own overwhelming gratitude and guilt. She saw Leo through the window. He was trying to get a small, red toy car to work, but one of the wheels was stuck. He pushed it, his small face scrunched in frustration. Finally, he threw it down in the snow with a little cry of anger. Without thinking, Elara put on her coat and boots and went outside. She walked over to where he stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She didn't say a word. She just knelt, picked up the car, and examined it. A tiny pebble was wedged in the axle. She pulled off her glove and used her fingernail to pry it out. It was stubborn. She reached into her hair and pulled out a bobby pin, using the metal tip to carefully work the pebble free. It popped out and fell into the snow. She spun the wheel. It turned perfectly. She held the car out to him. Leo looked from the car to her face, his expression one of cautious surprise. He took it from her hand, his small fingers brushing against hers. He pushed it on the ground. It rolled smoothly across the snow. He looked up at her again. He didn't smile, but the hard knot of suspicion in his eyes seemed to loosen, just a little. A few days later, She was in the main house's kitchen, making herself a cup of tea. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, was preparing Leo's lunch. A sandwich, with the crusts meticulously cut off. Elara had noticed before that Leo often left most of his sandwich untouched. He's such a picky eater, Mrs. Gable sighed, shaking her head. Elara thought for a moment. She remembered seeing him once, when he thought no one was looking, gnawing on the crust she'd seen Mrs. Gable about to throw away. May I try something? Elara asked quietly. Mrs. Gable, who had taken a quiet liking to Elara, shrugged and handed her the bread and peanut butter. Elara made a simple sandwich. She didn't cut the crusts off. She cut it into 4 neat squares and put it on a plate next to some apple slices. Julian brought Leo in for lunch a few minutes later. Leo sat down, looked at the plate, and then looked up at Elara, who was quietly sipping her tea at the other end of the kitchen island. He picked up a square and, to Mrs. Gable's astonishment, ate the entire thing. Then another, and another. He ate the whole sandwich, crusts and all. Julian watched, a look of quiet amazement on his face. He caught Elara's eye and gave her a small, grateful smile. The true turning point came a week later. A storm had blown in, rattling the large glass windows of the mansion. Elara couldn't sleep. She was thinking about Luna, sleeping in a foster home, cared for by strangers. The ache in her arms was a physical pain. Suddenly, she heard a noise from the main house. A child's cry, faint, but unmistakable. She waited, assuming Julian or Mrs. Gable would go to him. But the crying continued, growing more distressed. Julian was working late in his study, she knew. She slipped on a robe and hurried across the snowy path to the main house, letting herself in the back door Julian had insisted she use as her own. She followed the sound up the grand, curving staircase to the second floor. She found Leo's room, the door slightly ajar. He was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face, caught in the grips of a nightmare. She hesitated at the door, not wanting to frighten him. She didn't go in. She just stood in the hallway and began to hum. It was a simple, wordless lullaby. The same one she had hummed to Luna every night of her short life. A melody of pure love and comfort. Inside the room, Leo's crying slowly subsided. He lay back down, his small, ragged breaths evening out. He had fallen back asleep. Elara stayed for a few more minutes, her voice a low, soothing murmur in the quiet hall. Then, she turned and went back to her cottage. The next morning, as she was leaving to meet with the lawyer Julian had hired for her, Leo was waiting for her on the path. He didn't say a word. He just walked up to her and held out a piece of paper. It was a crayon drawing. A picture of a woman with long, dark hair, wearing the same blue sweater she had on now. Above the woman's head, he had drawn a big, bright, yellow sun. Elara's throat tightened. She took the drawing from his small hand. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It's beautiful." He gave her a tiny, shy nod. Then, for the first time, he smiled at her. A real, brilliant smile that transformed his serious little face. Then he turned and ran back toward the house. Elara stood in the snow, clutching the drawing to her chest. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like acceptance. It felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long, dark winter. The nights were the hardest. When the great house fell silent and the distractions of the day receded, the ghosts came out to play. For Julian, it was the ghost of laughter, the echo of Amelia's voice in the hallways. He would find himself working late in his study, surrounded by projections and market analyses, anything to keep the silence at bay. Sleep was a commodity he could no longer afford. For Elara, it was the ghost of a memory, the phantom weight of a baby in her arms, the sweet scent of her daughter's skin. She would lie awake in the luxurious bed in the guest cottage, a world away from the cold pavement, yet her heart was just as desolate. One night, the silence was too much for both of them. Julian gave up on the quarterly reports and went to the kitchen, seeking the simple comfort of a glass of milk, a childhood remedy for a grown-up sorrow. Elara gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen, seeking a glass of water to soothe a throat raw from unshed tears. They met under the soft, recessed lighting of the cavernous room. "Couldn't sleep?" Julian asked, his voice low. Elara shook her head, pulling her robe tighter around herself. "You either?" He managed a tired smile. The Vance Corporation apparently never sleeps, so its CEO isn't allowed to either. It was a weak attempt at a joke, and they both knew it. He poured 2 glasses of milk and motioned for her to sit at the huge marble island. For a few moments, they sat in a comfortable silence, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. "This house is too quiet," Julian said finally, staring into his glass. "When Amelia was alive, it was never quiet. There was always music playing. Or she'd be laughing about something. Or yelling at me for leaving my socks on the floor." He chuckled, a sad, hollow sound. "When she was gone, the silence was the first thing I noticed. It's deafening. I thought having Leo here. But he's become so quiet, too. He misses her so much. He's locked himself away in his own little world, and I don't know how to reach him." He looked up at Elara, his eyes filled with a vulnerability she had never seen before. "I throw myself into work because it's the only thing I know how to control. I can manage a multi-billion-dollar company, but I can't figure out how to make my own son smile." He paused, then added softly, "He smiled today, when he gave you that drawing. I haven't seen him smile like that in a long time." Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a flicker of purpose in the darkness. His confession, his raw honesty, created a space for her own. Emboldened by his trust, she began to speak, her voice barely a whisper at first. She told him about Mark. She told him about the beginning, the charm that had swept her off her feet, the promises of a future that felt like a fairy tale. Then, she told him about the change. The slow, insidious creep of control. The way he isolated her from her friends, criticized her choices, made her feel small and stupid. "He made me believe I needed him," she said, her gaze distant, lost in the painful memories. "That I couldn't survive without him. He took over my finances, to help me manage them," he said. She took a shaky breath. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was so happy. I thought a baby would fix everything. It would bring back the man I fell in love with." Her voice broke. "But it made it worse. He became angry, resentful. The day I told him, he drained our joint bank account, all my savings, and he was gone. Just gone. No note. No call. He vanished." Julian listened, his expression hardening, his hands clenched into fists on the countertop. "I lost my apartment," she continued, the words tumbling out now, a torrent of pain held back for too long. "My job let me go because I was missing shifts. I was so sick with stress. I had nothing. No one. I slept in shelters, on buses. I did everything I could to protect her, to keep her safe inside me." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "When she was born, I looked at her, and she was so perfect, and I knew I couldn't let her live my life. I couldn't let her grow up in the cold, hungry and scared. Leaving her in that alley. It wasn't giving up on her," she whispered, the words from her note echoing in the quiet kitchen. "It was the only act of love I had left to give. It was the only way to save her from me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and agonizing. Julian didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. He simply reached across the marble island and placed his large, warm hand over hers. His touch was firm, steady, a silent anchor in the storm of her grief. "You saved her, Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did was the bravest thing I have ever heard. You're a good mother." His words, so simple and so certain, were the absolution she hadn't known she was desperate to hear. She finally looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a billionaire benefactor, but a man who understood loss. A man who understood loneliness. A man who saw her. Not the victim, not the charity case. Her. In the shared silence of the sleeping mansion, two broken hearts found a common rhythm. The bond between them, forged in a snowstorm and tempered in quiet kindness, was now sealed by the truth of their shared wounds. They were no longer just a protector and a survivor. They were two lonely souls who had found a flicker of light in each other's darkness. The world intruded, as it always does. A local news channel, hungry for a feel-good story amidst the holiday gloom, ran a piece on the Christmas Eve miracle. They told the story of a benevolent billionaire who had discovered an abandoned baby, saving her from the storm. They didn't have Elara's name, and Julian's PR team had ensured her privacy was protected, but they mentioned that the mother had been found and was recovering. The story was syndicated, picked up by national news outlets. And in a grimy motel room hundreds of miles away, a man named Mark saw it. He didn't see a story of hope. He saw an opportunity. He saw a billionaire, a vulnerable woman, and a baby that was his ticket to a life of ease. He saw a lottery ticket, and he was ready to cash it in. A week later, the gates of Julian's estate were no longer a symbol of quiet privacy. They were the backdrop for a media circus. Mark had hired a sleazy tabloid lawyer and flown to the city. He stood before a throng of cameras, his face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow and righteous anger. He wept for the news crews, claiming he had been searching desperately for his distraught, mentally unstable girlfriend and his beloved, stolen child. He painted himself as the victim. He painted Elara as a troubled woman who had been manipulated by a wealthy predator seeking to steal his baby. Elara saw it on the television in her cottage. The sound was off, but she didn't need to hear the words. She saw his face, the familiar, false sincerity in his eyes. The way he could turn on the charm, the practiced performance of a man who had been lying his entire life. The air left her lungs. The room began to spin. The fragile sense of safety she had painstakingly built over the past few weeks shattered into a million pieces. He had found her. The monster from her past had found her. And he was going to use her to destroy the only good thing that had happened to her in years. He would ruin Julian. He would tarnish his name, his company. He would drag him and his innocent son through the mud. Her first, primal instinct was to run. It was what she had always done. Flee. Disappear. Make herself small and invisible so the danger would pass. Her hands trembled as she threw the few things she owned into a bag. The warm sweater Julian had given her. The drawing from Leo. She had to leave. She had to protect them from her. Her past was a poison, and she couldn't let it infect their lives. She was at the door of the main house, her hand on the knob, tears blurring her vision, when Julian found her. He must have seen the same news report. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. But when he saw her, the bag in her hand, the terror in her eyes, his expression softened into one of fierce protectiveness. "Elara, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "I have to go," she sobbed, the words torn from her. "Don't you see? This is what he does. He destroys everything. I can't let him do this to you. I can't let him hurt you or Leo." She tried to push past him, but he put his hands gently on her shoulders, holding her in place. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She lifted her tear-streaked face to his. "You are not going anywhere," he said, and there was an unshakable conviction in his voice that stilled her panic. "You are not running from him anymore. This is your home now. Leo and I, we are your family now. And I will not let him hurt our family." The word "our" hung in the air between them, a declaration more powerful than any legal document. "He's a liar and a parasite," Julian continued, his eyes like chips of flint. "And I am not afraid of him. He has made a very, very big mistake." He let go of her shoulders and pulled out his phone. He made 2 calls. The first was to his head of security. The second was to the senior partner of the most powerful law firm in the country. His instructions were simple, calm, and utterly ruthless. "I want to know everything about him," he said into the phone. "Everywhere he's been, everyone he's hurt, every dollar he's stolen. Spare no expense." The next morning, Julian Vance held a press conference. Not at his gates, amidst the baying wolves of the tabloid press, but in the stately auditorium of his corporate headquarters. He stood at a podium, a portrait of calm authority. He did not mention Elara by name. He did not speak of love or emotion. He spoke of facts. He laid out, with cold, clinical precision, the timeline of Mark's abandonment. He presented bank records, obtained by his investigators, showing the transfer of Elara's life savings. He spoke of a restraining order filed by a previous girlfriend Mark had also defrauded. He painted a picture not of a concerned father, but of a serial predator. Then his voice changed. The cold CEO receded, and the protective man Elara knew emerged. "The mother of this child is a victim of domestic abuse and financial exploitation," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "She is a woman of incredible courage and a fiercely loving mother who made an impossible choice out of desperation. She has my complete and unwavering support. I will be personally funding her legal battle to gain full and sole custody of her daughter. And I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure that the man who victimized her and now seeks to profit from her suffering will be brought to justice." It was a public declaration of war, a line drawn in the sand. Elara watched from the safety of his office, Leo holding her hand. In that moment, she finally understood what it felt like not to be alone in a fight. She was not a victim cowering in the shadows. She was standing in the light, and a titan was standing with her. The legal battle was not a battle at all. It was an annihilation. Julian's lawyers descended upon Mark's flimsy case like eagles on a field mouse. They produced sworn affidavits from past victims, forensic accountants who traced Elara's stolen money, and witnesses who testified to Mark's complete and utter disinterest in her pregnancy. Mark and his tabloid lawyer, faced with irrefutable evidence and the threat of multiple fraud charges, crumbled. His petition for custody was summarily dismissed by a disgusted judge. A permanent, 500-mile restraining order was issued, barring him from ever contacting Elara or Luna again. He vanished from their lives as quickly as he had reappeared, a bitter footnote in their story. With the threat neutralized, the path for Elara was clear. Supported by Julian, she went through the necessary steps with social services. She had a stable home. She had emotional support. Julian had even created a position for her, managing a new charitable initiative for single mothers at the Vance Foundation, giving her financial independence and a sense of purpose. She was no longer the desperate, broken woman who had collapsed in the snow. She was strong. She was whole. The day she was granted full, unconditional custody of Luna was the day the sun truly came out. Walking out of the courthouse, with her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms and Julian by her side, Elara felt a sense of peace she had never known. Life at the mansion settled into a new, happy rhythm. The vast, silent house was now filled with the sounds of a family. Leo's laughter as he played with Elara, the soft gurgles and coos of baby Luna, the quiet, contented conversations between Julian and Elara in the evenings. The house had become a home. One evening, a few months later, they were all in the large, comfortable family room. A fire crackled in the hearth. Elara was on the floor, rocking Luna gently, while Leo sat beside her, seriously showing his baby sister the pictures in a colorful book. Julian sat on the sofa, watching them. He wasn't looking at a balance sheet or a market report. He was just watching his family. He saw the way Elara's face was illuminated with love as she gazed at the children. He saw the way Leo, once so withdrawn, now leaned against her, completely at ease, his small hand resting on her arm. He saw his own reflection in the dark glass of the window, and for the first time in years, the man looking back didn't seem haunted. He seemed happy. He slid off the sofa and sat on the floor beside Elara. He didn't have a ring. He hadn't planned a speech. The moment was too real, too perfect for anything rehearsed. "Elara," he said softly, his voice full of a quiet intensity that made her look up from the baby. "For 2 years," he began, "this was just a building. A beautiful, empty shell. I rattled around in it, and Leo rattled around in it, and we were like 2 lonely ghosts. But from the moment you came here, you started filling it with life again." He reached out, his hand covering hers. "You and Luna, you've made it a home. You've given Leo his smile back. You've given me my life back. I love you, Elara. More than I ever thought I could love anyone again." Her eyes filled with tears, but these were not the tears of sorrow she had once known. They were tears of overwhelming joy. "I don't want you to ever feel like you're a guest here," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I want this to be our home. Forever. Will you and Luna make this our forever home? Elara, will you marry me?" She opened her mouth to answer, but before a sound could escape, a small, loud voice piped up. Leo looked up from his book, his eyes wide and shining with excitement. "Yes," he shouted, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Say yes, Elara. Then you can be my mom for real." Elara's breath caught in a sob that was half laughter, half tears. She looked from Leo's hopeful face to Julian's loving one. "Yes," she whispered, her voice overflowing with all the love in her heart. "Yes, of course, yes." Julian's face broke into a smile so radiant it seemed to light up the entire room. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, promising kiss that sealed their future. And on the floor between them, Leo reached out and patted his baby sister's hand, as if to tell her the good news. Their family was finally, officially complete. 1 year later, Christmas Eve, the great mansion on the hill was once again covered in a soft blanket of snow. But inside, it was a universe of warmth and light. A magnificent Christmas tree stood in the family room, its branches filled not with professionally curated ornaments, but with a happy jumble of creations. Salt dough handprints, strings of popcorn, and brightly colored paper chains. At the very top sat a slightly lopsided cardboard star, covered in gold glitter, placed there with great ceremony by Leo. The room was not pristine. A half-finished puzzle lay on a coffee table. A collection of colorful building blocks was piled in a corner. A soft, well-loved teddy bear lay abandoned on the rug. It was the beautiful, happy mess of a life well lived. Elara, Julian, Leo, and Luna were all in matching flannel pajamas. They were curled up together on the enormous sofa, drinking hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Luna, now a bubbly toddler with her mother's dark hair and Julian's serious eyes, pointed a chubby finger at a glittering snowflake ornament. "Bah," she demanded. Julian laughed, lifting her from his lap. "You want the bah?" He carried her over to the tree, letting her pat the ornament gently. "There you go, sweet pea." Leo, now a bright and talkative 6-year-old, leaned against Elara's side. "Mom," he said, the word still new enough to make her heart swell every time he said it. "Do you think Santa will like the cookies we made?" "I think he will love them," Elara said, hugging him tightly. "Especially the one with all the red sprinkles." Her gaze drifted across the room, past the fire, to a collection of framed photos on the mantelpiece. There was a wedding photo, a small, intimate ceremony in the garden from the past summer. There were pictures of Luna's first steps, of Leo's first day of school, and in the center of them all was a simple, small frame. Inside it was a crayon drawing of a woman with long dark hair, standing under a bright yellow sun. Julian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Luna was settled on his hip, her head now resting sleepily against his chest. "Thinking about that first night?" he whispered, his eyes on the drawing. She nodded, leaning back against the solid warmth of him. "I was so lost, so cold. I never could have imagined this. I was lost too," he admitted softly. "I just had a much nicer roof over my head. You two saved us, Elara. You and Luna. You saved me and Leo." He kissed the side of her head. "Best Christmas Eve ever." She turned in his arms, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She looked at her family, her strong, kind husband, her beautiful, happy children, the home they had built together, not of stone and glass, but of love and second chances. "The best," she agreed, her voice full of quiet certainty. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the world in a pristine, peaceful white. It was the same snow that had fallen a year ago, on her darkest night. But tonight, it wasn't a symbol of cold and despair. It was a symbol of new beginnings. Because sometimes, family isn't something you're born into. It's the people who find you in the storm and lead you into the warmth. It's proving that the most broken pieces can be put back together to build something more beautiful and far stronger than before.